Okay, so let's try and unpack this. We're looking at something pretty paradoxical today, right?
Sure.
How does really deep personal trauma, quite layered trauma, actually become the foundation for a whole spiritual philosophy, one that's really focused on discipline, rigor, and this idea of radical personal sovereignty?
It's a huge transformation, yeah. And that's exactly what we're getting into. We're diving deep into the work of Kandayia Ali, who goes by IAMOmni professionally. Her work, it's essentially this guide, you could say, to recovering from trauma, spiritual reclamation, and really guiding people towards what she calls their soul's sovereign existence.
Right, so our mission here is to kind of pull out the core principles. What holds this approach together?
Yeah.
Because the sources we have, they're a real mixed part memoir, very personal testimony, spiritual insights, but also some formal philosophy too. We're trying to see where that lived experience meets, structured spiritual practice and even academic credentials.
And the tone, you notice it straight away. It's not gentle. The work is described as honest, courageous, really raw. It's even called a chronicle of rebirth through knowledge and faith. So right off the bat, it tells you the teachings aren't just abstract ideas. They come directly from survival, from getting through incredible adversity. It's like a spiritual map drawn after the battle.
That definitely raises the stakes. And if the experience is the map, then what makes the teaching method itself unique? Because we see IAMOmni's work across, well, all sorts of things: music, art, writing, film, even spiritual tools. Delivering teachings that way, it's not exactly traditional.
Yeah, and what's fascinating is how the sources present that creativity. It's like the delivery system for the actual method. The teaching, it explicitly says, is not based on research and theory alone. No, it comes primarily from, and these are her words, the roads I have walked, the truths I have fought for, and crucially, the actual practices that got her through the darkest nights.
So the life story isn't just like background color. It's the curriculum itself. It's the proof it works.
Exactly. Her whole path, survive, dealing with silence, awakening, rebirth, all of that is positioned as the medicine she's offering. It means the method has been, tested under fire. And the identity she describes is powerful. Survivor's truth meets prophetic awareness. The goal seems singular. Wake people up to remembrance. Inspire that sovereignty, help them get back their voice, their power, which trauma and systemic silencing tend to take away.
Okay, so you have this intense personal story, but then it connects to formal structure. It goes from that raw experience to an applied method. We probably need to talk about the academic side, the credentials mentioned, because they seem to add a layer of formality to this very personal journey.
That mix is key to understanding the whole thing, I think. The sources mention she holds an ordination as a high priestess, a doctorate in divinity, specifically in divination, that's interesting, another doctorate in metaphysics, and she's got ministry credentials too, allowing her to perform sacred unions. So this isn't just someone sharing advice, there's a claim to a kind of formal, albeit specialized knowledge system backing it up.
And importantly, the sources address those titles head on. There's a clarification saying they're presented not to set me apart, but a responsibility to serve. That really reframes them, doesn't it? Makes them tools for helping others, not just badges of honor.
Connects the lived experience back to a duty of care. And thinking about the scope, why those specific doctorates, divination and metaphysics, placing them centrally in a trauma recovery system suggests intuition and understanding the deeper structures of reality are seen as vital parts of the healing process.
It definitely grounds the approach in some older, maybe more esoteric traditions alongside the personal story.
Yes, and if you pull back to the bigger philosophical view, it's described as universal.
Yeah.
The tools, the techniques, they're apparently universally researched across many religious, spiritual, scientific concepts. So the goal is broad: assist spiritual healing and what's called soul recalibration.
Soul recalibration, that sounds specific. If the soul gets wounded by trauma, what does recalibrating it actually mean in this system, like practically speaking?
Well, the way the source describes it, recalibration seems to be about systematically correcting the internal, maybe vibrational patterns that trauma has thrown out of whack.
Yeah.
Think of it like fine-tuning the spirit. It suggests the spiritual work isn't just vague feelings. It's about making precise adjustments to get back into alignment.
And the thing that needs recalibrating, that's tied to the core idea of the whole movement, right? Understanding that unspoken link between the mind, body, and soul.
Exactly right. The underlying idea is that trauma hits the whole system, not just your thoughts or emotions, but the entire spiritual operating system. And the work involves understanding how the soul connects not just inwardly to the mind and body, but also, and this seems vital, its connection to all. It's very integrative, trying to dissolve those lines between the individual spirit and maybe a wider consciousness. True healing, it suggests, needs that holistic alignment.
Okay, if the healing mechanism is universal, this mind-body-soul connection, what about the ethics of sharing it? That brings us to what the sources say about inner peace and wealth. Why offer this intense personal work, sometimes freely?
That commitment to offering support freely sometimes seems really rooted in her own past. It comes from this realization that true wealth lies in inner peace. It sounds like a direct response to her own struggles, navigating darkness without having resources herself. She mentions observing guides who came with unexpected costs, potentially harming dignity or hope, and there's this vow to make healing more accessible.
And that openness includes looking back at her own coping mechanisms before she had this awakening. She talks about a really painful pattern, putting her own needs aside to constantly support others, feeling value only when she felt useful and appreciated.
That's such a key insight into the trauma cycle, isn't it? Especially for people whose identity gets wrapped up in being the helper. She calls that pattern one of the biggest lies I told myself to cope with all the pain I had trapped inside. And what's really insightful is she realized it wasn't just her pain, but absorbed burdens from others too. Finding worth only through what you do for others, the source really flags that as a dangerous trap, and realizing it was a turning point.
So after that realization, what comes next is this active, and it sounds like a really hard, work of spiritual reclamation. When she started tackling the effects of abuse, manipulation, silencing, what did that process of awakening and the discipline that followed actually look like?
The focus shifts heavily onto the mechanics of that awakening. It goes beyond just becoming aware. It moves into applied discipline. It involves exploring really complex things like emotional sovereignty, maintaining moral integrity, doing shadow work, even seeking what's termed divine justice. The main theme seems to be the soul rediscovering itself after being, as she puts it, sort of erased.
That combination of academic framework with deep spiritual work feels distinct. Why is shadow work specifically highlighted so much in this approach?
Shadow work here seems to mean directly facing and integrating those hidden parts of yourself, the unprocessed trauma, the shame, the unconscious drivers that block alignment and true sovereignty. It's presented as the way you restore moral integrity, making sure your actions match your inner truth. And that seems necessary for the whole soul recalibration idea.
But achieving that integrity involved a phase described as extremely difficult and shared very openly. This idea of cutting cords and breaking ties with those I held dearly in order to move forward into my purpose. The source even admits this initially felt extreme or overzealous. I mean, that's a really radical, often painful thing to suggest. Does the material offer guidance on how to do that separation ethically, or is it just presented as, a necessary step you had to take for sovereignty?
It's definitely presented as necessary, almost non-negotiable for self-preservation, but the source doesn't gloss over the cost. It talks about the intense, bittersweet internal battle. It clarifies this isn't done casually. It's framed as the ultimate act of self-love. The reasoning given is that loving yourself enough to walk away from everything and everyone you thought defined your existence is what's needed to get beyond the veil of self-worth and find your true identity. It's asserting that your core self exists separate from those external ties, especially the unhealthy ones.
It sounds like a kind of necessary sacrifice, maybe, that leads to that absolute sovereignty she talks about. She's basically using her own intense struggle as a template for collective growth, and she's very upfront about why. She stresses these experiences are shared as personal mirrors for reflection, awareness, growth, lessons, and ideologies based on my personal experiences.
Correct. And explicitly for collective healing, not to elicit pity, that really transforms the personal story into something utilitarian, almost a case study for others to reflect on in their own lives. It maintains a bit of distance, allowing you, the listener, to engage with it critically, perhaps.
Which brings us back to the whole point, the intention behind this work, and maybe our deep dive too. What's the main takeaway for someone listening in terms of how to use this?
I think the core philosophy emphasized is that these insights, these methods, they're intended as supportive aids for your journey. They're not directives. It's definitely an empowerment model, not prescriptive, even with all the talk of discipline and structure. The main utility seems to be learning how to view your own trauma, no matter how deep, not as something that diminishes you, but as the actual raw material for building your strongest discipline and sovereignty.
Yeah, the message seems to be You're seen, heard, felt, loved through this process. But the knowledge is support, not command. Ultimately, your journey is yours to lead.
Exactly. The medicine is offered, the map is there, but you have to administer the dose yourself and walk your own path. That fundamental shift from seeing oneself as a victim of circumstance to becoming the disciplined sovereign leader of one's own life, that really seems to be the central transformation being offered.
A powerful idea for sure. So here's something to think about. Considering this work is so explicitly based on IAMOmni's deep personal testimony, built on the idea that her incredibly difficult path can be medicine for others, how does accepting that framework that someone else's specific hard-won lessons might illuminate or confirm your path to spiritual sovereignty, how does that challenge or maybe affirm how you currently see yourself in your own journey? Something to reflect on as you continue to lead your own way forward.